something in that spot. Tell me if this sounds familiar. You're just casually playing Super Mario 64 when all of a sudden, bam, you hit something. But what'd you hit? It doesn't look like there's anything there, but for some reason, the game considers you to be hitting something in that spot. So this is what we call an invisible wall, and there are many of them in the game. Now for most people, invisible walls are like this mysterious, elusive thing. You may have seen clips like this.
Oh! What was that? There's an invis wall there?
Or like this.
Use of that, so I got a visible wall!
Or like this.
What? No! What the?
Or like this.
And invisible. Yep. Yep!
Or like this.
Why is there an invisible wall there?
Yeah, why is there an invisible wall there? Why do all of these strange interactions happen? For decades, invisible walls have tormented players, messing up runs and causing tons of confusion, because nobody really seems to know what invisible walls are or why they're there. So, I made it my mission to answer that and put an end to the confusion. So come with me on this journey as we delve into the deep, dark, inner heart of invisible walls. This is Invisible Walls Explained Once and For All. But before we get to invisible walls, there are some basic fundamentals of Super Mario 64 that we need to go over first. So, all geometry in the game is made up of surface triangles, which you can see here. Now, there are three different types of surface triangles. First, there are floors. Floors are the triangles that you can stand on, and in visuals we color them blue. Second, there are walls. Walls are the triangles that you can push, punch, kick, and wall jump off of. We color them green. And third, there are ceilings. Ceilings are the triangles that if you jump up into them, they'll cut short your upwards trajectory. And some ceilings even let you hang on them and swing around. We color ceilings red. Now, one important property of a triangle is its normal vector. Think of a triangle's normal vector as an arrow that juts out perpendicularly from the triangle. Interestingly, it's the direction of a triangle's normal vector that determines whether the triangle is a floor, wall, or ceiling. If the normal vector is pointing upwards at all, then the triangle is a floor. See, even these triangles count as floors because their normal vectors point just a tiny bit upwards. On the other hand, if the normal vector is pointing downwards at all, then the triangle is a ceiling. So even these ones are ceilings because their normal vectors point just a tiny bit downwards. And finally, if the normal vector is pointing exactly sideways or extremely close to exactly sideways, then the triangle is a wall. So now you know the three kinds of triangles: floors, walls, and ceilings, whose normal vectors point upwards, sideways, and downwards respectively. Note that here I'm showing the triangles from the side, so they just look like lines from this angle. Now we're going to talk about the triangle hitboxes, aka how these triangles affect Mario and the area around them. So let's start with floors. A floor's hitbox extends 78 units below the floor, and its effect is that it snaps Mario up onto the floor. So we can see that as Mario enters the hitbox, he gets snapped up. But now let's make this visual more precise. You see, Mario's position is the point at the bottom center of his model, which I'll represent with this symbol. So when I talk about Mario entering a hitbox, it's purely about whether the point at the bottom center of his model enters the hitbox, not just any point on his model entering the hitbox. Also, Mario doesn't move around continuously, but in discrete chunks, which I'll represent with yellow arrows. So let's watch it again. Mario moves to the right one arrow at a time, and now he's about to enter the floor hitbox. So on the next step, Mario enters the floor hitbox and then gets snapped up onto the floor. In other words, those two arrows happen on the same step, so we never actually see Mario below the floor. Here's what a floor snap looks like in the game. Mario walks towards the wooden post and then snaps up onto it. If we have multiple floors in a row, then Mario would snap up on each one of them, so his height increases each time he reaches a new step. That's how climbing stairs works in the game. And if the floor is at an angle, then Mario would snap up each time he moves. So in this case, his height increases continuously. And that's how ramps work in the game. Though, note that floors will also snap Mario downwards to some extent, so that walking downhill works too. Now let's talk about walls. A wall's hitbox extends out 50 units on both sides, and it's offset to be a little lower down than the wall triangle itself. Its effect is that it pushes Mario sideways in the direction of the triangle's normal vector, which in this case is to the left. So we can see that as Mario enters this hitbox, he gets displaced sideways, putting him exactly flush with the wall's hitbox and also putting him into the pushing animation. Just like before, the arrow for Mario going into the hitbox and the arrow for Mario being pushed out of the hitbox happen on the same step, so we don't actually see Mario inside of the wall hitbox. And so now, if Mario just keeps walking into the wall hitbox, then he ends up pushing against the wall in a state of equilibrium. Like on every step, he goes a little into the wall, then gets pushed out that distance, then goes a little into the wall, then gets pushed out that distance, etc. So that's what's going on when you push against the wall in the game. So even though Mario's position is 50 units away from the wall triangle, it still looks like he's touching the wall because his model is about 50 units in radius. In contrast, if Mario enters enters the wall hitbox from the other side, then he gets a big push from the wall, because this time he gets displaced almost all of the 100 unit diameter of the wall hitbox. Here's what that looks like in the game, though you're not normally meant to go into a wall from that side. And then for ceilings, their hitbox extends from 160 units below the ceiling to infinitely upwards. Now the lower portion and upper portion have the same effect, but what effect that is actually varies based on what action Mario's in, so let's go through the different actions. First, if Mario's on the ground, then the ceiling hitbox cancels his movement. So you can see that as Mario tries to enter the hitbox, his movement gets cancelled, which prevents him from entering the ceiling hitbox. And he also does the pushing animation when this happens. Here's what that looks like in the game. So note that even though Mario's 160 units below the ceiling triangle, it basically looks like his head is touching the ceiling because his model is just under 160 units tall. Second, if Mario's in the air and tries to enter a ceiling hitbox, then what happens depends on whether he's moving upwards or downwards. If he enters the ceiling hitbox while moving upwards, then his movement gets cancelled and his vertical speed gets set to 0. This cuts short his upwards trajectory, since from that point on, he'll start moving downwards due to gravity. I mean, gravity gets applied every frame you're in the air, but in these visuals, I'm simplifying things and only applying it when it's relevant to the point I'm making. So here's jumping up into a ceiling in the game. It cuts short Mario's upwards movement, and then he falls down afterwards. On the other hand, if he enters a ceiling hitbox while moving downwards, then only the horizontal component of his movement gets cancelled, and so he just does the vertical component, which is moving straight down. Like, ceilings aren't going to cancel the whole movement, because that would let you hover in the air, and I have a hunch the programmers didn't want that. So here's what falling into a ceiling looks like in the game. It cancels Mario's horizontal movement to prevent him from going inside the ceiling hitbox, but he still falls down. And then third, if Mario's in water, then the ceiling hitbox doesn't cancel his movement, but instead snaps him down to the bottom of the ceiling hitbox. So we can see that as Mario enters the hitbox, he gets snapped down. Here's what that looks like in the game. Mario snaps down as soon as he enters the ceiling hitbox. And if the ceiling is at an angle, then Mario snaps down each time he moves forwards. So for example, if I swim into the ship, I get moved downwards accordingly. Now, you may find it strange that ceiling hitboxes extend infinitely upwards. Like, if a ceiling triangle's right here, then why should it have an effect way up here? Well, the thing is, most of the time, you only have access to the lower portion of the hitbox. The upper portion is usually out of reach, and so you wouldn't notice its effects. In fact, ceilings typically fall into one of two cases. Case 1, we're in an enclosed room, so the hitboxes look like this. In this case, the hitboxes prevent you from exiting the room. Like, if you try to exit downwards, the floor snaps you back up. If you try to exit sideways, the wall pushes you back in. And if you try to exit upwards, the ceiling cancels your movement and cuts short your upwards trajectory. So in this case, the room keeps you inside, and so you'd never normally be all the way up here interacting with the upper ceiling hitbox. And then case 2, there's an enclosed structure, like a box. So the hitboxes look like this. Now, I said ceiling hitboxes extend infinitely upwards, but that's just what they do in isolation. Because you see, when there's a floor above the ceiling, then the ceiling hitbox only extends upwards until it meets the floor hitbox. So you can see that the inside of this box is filled with the upper portion of the ceiling hitbox. And once again, this upper portion is inaccessible since there's no way to enter the box. Like, if you try to enter going downwards, the floor snaps you back up. If you try to enter going sideways, the wall pushes you back out. And if you try to enter going upwards, the ceiling cancels your movement and cuts short your upwards trajectory. So in this case, the box keeps you out, and so you'd never normally be inside of it interacting with the upper ceiling hitbox. One other note, you can see that the triangle hitboxes overlap in some cases, which brings into question which ones take priority. Well, that's actually pretty simple. Wall interactions happen first, so I put their hitboxes on the top layer, then floor interactions, so they're on the next layer, and then ceiling interactions, so they're on the bottom layer. Now, even though ceiling hitboxes cancel Mario's movement, there are still some ways to enter a ceiling hitbox, like by having an object push you into it. For example, here I have a bob-omb push me into a ceiling hitbox, specifically the ceiling on the underside of the cog. So now I'm actually stuck because the ceiling cancels any movement I try to do, and it won't let me jump up either. Separately, here's what it looks like to enter a ceiling hitbox in the air. Mario just falls straight down since any sideways movement gets cancelled. And so there, we actually did touch the upper portion of a ceiling hitbox because we entered above the ceiling of the tunnel. So anyway, now we know the hitboxes of the 3 types of triangles. But there's one other hitbox that's also important, which is out of bounds. Now the term out of bounds can mean different things depending on the context. Like, a person might say that getting right here is out of bounds, because this isn't somewhere that you're intended to go in the course. But that's not what we mean in this case. See, the most useful way to define out of bounds is any point in space where there's no floor triangle below. So if our entire course was just this one floor triangle, then all of this area would be out of bounds. So that's everything to the side of the triangle and below it, just not above it. Think about it like this. The default state of space is out of bounds, and floors create safe havens above them. Also note that we color out of bounds gray and give it this symbol, and you'll see why in a moment. Now for the most part, Mario isn't allowed to enter out of bounds. If he's on the ground and tries to enter out of bounds, then his movement gets cancelled and he pushes, just like with ceilings. An easy place to see this is on the castle roof. Just walk up to the edge and Mario will start pushing. If Mario's in the air and tries to enter out of bounds, then the horizontal component of his movement gets cancelled, and so he only does the vertical component. So unlike ceilings, this happens for both upwards and downwards movement. That means you can jump up against out of bounds without it cutting short your upwards trajectory. And finally, if Mario's in water and tries to enter out of bounds, then his movement just gets cancelled. There's not a normal place where this happens in the game, but if you clip into the tunnel in Wet Dry World, like we did earlier, then you'll fall into the tunnel after the loading zone. Because of that, the town section of the level isn't loaded, and so you can just swim into the end of the tunnel. This is swimming into out of bounds, so Mario's movement gets cancelled and he just ends up swimming in place. So the reason Mario's not able to jump off of courses like Bob on Battlefield is because you can't move into out of bounds. There's no actual wall triangles on the edges of these courses keeping you in. And for courses with death barriers, like Cool Mountain, the reason you can jump off of these courses is because the death barrier itself is made up of floor triangles. Here's a zoomed out view of the whole course. So you can see that the death barrier is made up of 2 giant floor triangles below the main part of the course. And then here's a side view of the 2 courses. So Cool Mountain has a death barrier floor below it, while Bob on Battlefield doesn't. The death barrier creates a safe haven all around the course, making that area habitable. So that's why in Cool Mountain, you can jump off the course and go below it, whereas you can't do that in Bob on Battlefield. Now it is technically possible to enter out of bounds, but it's even harder to do than entering a ceiling hitbox. Like, our old trick with getting pushed by an object doesn't work in this case, because the game knows not to apply the object push if it would put Mario out of bounds. But nevertheless, there are still some ways to do it. For example, we can enter out of bounds by doing a ledge grab in this corner and then climbing up. We can jump into a cork box next to a steep hill. We can have the ground move out from under Mario, which is done here using the merry-go-round floor. And we can have Chuckya throw Mario out of bounds. As you can see in each of these cases, Mario dies when he goes out of bounds, which is why we give out of bounds the skull and crossbones symbol. But also when this happens, Mario stops having his hat on, though you get it back after you respawn. Now everyone always wonders, why does going out of bounds make Mario lose his hat? Well, let me explain. You see, Mario's logic every frame goes like this. First, it resets his hat state, so he'll be in the state of having no hat. Then it lets Mario do his action, like say, 1 frame of walking forwards, and finally, it updates his hat state to be how it's supposed to be, which gives him his hat again. And so his hat will be on by the time he gets rendered. So that's what normally happens every frame. But between steps 1 and 2, there's a check. Specifically, it checks if Mario's out of bounds, and if so, then we're done with the function, don't do the rest of the steps. So let's say Mario's currently out of bounds, and now let's walk through the steps to see what happens. First, it resets his hat state, which makes him have no hat. Then the check ends the whole function since Mario's out of bounds. So we never even get to step 3 where it puts his hat back on, and so we just see Mario without his hat. In other words, we're seeing the intermediate state of things that we're not normally supposed to see. So anyway, now we know the 4 types of hitboxes: floors, walls, ceilings, and out of bounds. Now you may have noticed that there's a bit of a similarity between walls, ceilings, and out of bounds, because they all basically block Mario's horizontal movement. So let's do a side-by-side comparison. On the left, we'll have Mario interact with a wall hitbox. In the center, we'll have Mario interact with a ceiling hitbox. And on the right, we'll have Mario interact with out of bounds. And just to clarify the ceiling case, there weren't many ceilings that worked well for this visual, but I did find one. See, in the castle foyer, I clipped behind this pillar, did a backwards long jump, and then used the speed to clip behind the upstairs key door. Now opening that door loads a new area, so by clipping behind it, we end up in this sort of fake area that you're not meant to be in. There's not many surface triangles here, despite what the visuals look like. So that means we can go to the edge of the floor and push directly on a ceiling hitbox, specifically the ceiling of the hallway below that has the boo in it. So I just wanted to clarify that. So now let's compare the three cases. If Mario just walks forwards, then in all three cases he stays in place doing the pushing animation. Here's a diagram from above. See, the wall hitbox lets him go into it and then pushes him back out, which makes him be flush with the hitbox. But the ceiling and out of bounds hitboxes just cancel the movement, so he won't even be flush with those hitboxes. But now watch what happens if we try pushing at an angle. Angle instead of head-on. In the wall case, we do a sidestepping animation, but in the ceiling and out of bounds cases, we still push, but now at an angle. See, the wall hitbox lets you enter the hitbox at an angle, then pushes you out perpendicularly, which lets you move along the edge of the hitbox. But the ceiling and out of bounds hitboxes still just cancel the movement, so you don't end up moving along their edges. So to recap so far, the pushing animation isn't actually specific to walls. It can happen for ceilings and out of bounds too, though the sidestepping animation is specific to walls. Now let's see what happens when we jump into these three hitboxes. For the wall and out of bounds, the jump goes all the way up. But in the ceiling case, the jump goes nowhere, because like I mentioned earlier, ceiling hitboxes cut short your upwards trajectory. So in this case, Mario doesn't even leave the ground, he just lands instantly. So in our bullet points, let's add that ceilings are the only one that cancel your upward speed. And just to keep the bullet points lined up, let's add that out of bounds is the only one that kills you. But now let's see what happens if we jump into them, but don't touch them until the downwards portion of the trajectory. In all three cases, Mario's forwards movement gets blocked and so he just falls down in place. So just like with the ground movement, the wall lets Mario move into its hitbox and then pushes him back out, while the ceiling and out of bounds cancel the movement altogether. But that's just for jumping at a slow speed. If instead Mario jumps into the hitboxes moving at a medium speed, then in all three cases he does a soft bonk. You know, a bonk without any star particles and Mario stays upright. So let's add that to our notes. And if he jumps into the hitboxes moving at a fast speed, or during certain other actions like a dive or slide kick, then in all three cases he does a hard bonk, which has star particles and Mario falls off his feet. So let's also add that. But now listen to the sound of each bonk. See, when you bonk on a ceiling or out of bounds, it makes a sort of boingy sound effect, while the wall doesn't do that. And so let's add that to our notes too. So overall, you can see that the three cases are pretty similar. They all let you push on them, and they all let you bonk on them. So it's easy to see why people might confuse walls, ceilings, and out of bounds. Someone might see Mario pushing and think he's pushing on a wall, but actually he's pushing on out of bounds. And someone might see Mario bonk and think he bonked on a wall, but actually he bonked on a ceiling. So just keep in mind how similar these three types of hitboxes are. Now, we're almost ready to get to invisible walls, but there's still one more topic we need to cover first, which is positional units. For example, here I'm showing Mario's position on screen so you can see his X coordinate, Y coordinate, and Z coordinate. Each coordinate represents how far along Mario is on the corresponding axis. The X-axis goes east and west, with east being the positive direction. The Y-axis goes up and down, with up being the positive direction. And the Z-axis goes north and south, with south being the positive direction. So take a top-down map of a course. If we zoom in, we can see the grid of individual units. So a single unit in SM64 is incredibly tiny, only like a centimeter wide, and the extra bold lines are the X and Z axes. Now we're going to analyze what a surface triangle looks like at this scale. I mean, surface triangles are usually way bigger than this, but we're going to be looking at some pretty tiny triangles for now, just so that we can see how certain properties work. Now, as you know, a surface triangle has 3 vertices, but what you may not know is that these 3 vertices have to have integer coordinates. In other words, the vertices always lie on the intersection of a horizontal unit line and a vertical unit line. So a triangle might look like this, or like this, or like this, but it would never look like this because here the vertices aren't at integer coordinates. The reason for this restriction is because triangle vertices are stored as shorts, and a short is a variable type that can only have integer values between negative 32,768 and 32,767. So it's impossible for a vertex to have a value that is isn't an integer. So now let's consider this floor triangle. The question we're going to be analyzing is, where can Mario stand on this triangle? You might assume that it would just be this area, like the area enclosed within the triangle, but that's not right. Let me explain by filling out this little table. So Mario himself is at some coordinates, and those coordinates are stored as floats. Floats are another variable type, and they basically store real numbers, like numbers that can have decimal components. For example, let's say Mario's at x coordinate 1.34 and z coordinate negative 2.79. But that's not the point that the game checks to see whether it's within the floor triangle or not. Instead, the game first converts those values to another type. Specifically, it converts the coordinates to shorts, and then that's the point that the game checks to see whether it's within the floor triangle or not. And like I mentioned earlier, shorts can only have integer